a message from our sponsors who are supporting the podcast across the whole of September. Have you ever wondered what you would do if a loved one went missing? Have you ever wondered what those same loved ones might do if something ever happened to you? Help You Find Me is a safe and encrypted If I Go Missing file that you can securely share with the people you trust the most. Help You Find Me is a secure yet simple way to share private data for use in emergency situations. All data is end-to-end encrypted and accessible only by you and the people you choose to share it with. Not even the staff at Help You Find Me can access this information. Every day, hour, minute, and second counts. In an emergency situation, every second that ticks by can be an eternity. If someone you love goes missing, it's extremely important to track their recent activity for signs of where they may be. Help You Find Me uses decades-old methods with modern industry-grade technology to securely and easily share the important information with loved ones. All private data is end-to-end encrypted. The authorities will do everything they can to access your information, but the legal process can take weeks, and important details like banking and credit card records, cell phone records, location history, email and social media accounts could all be extremely important information. These could be the most crucial pieces of the puzzle. You choose who to share your private data with and the rules by which they can access it. Each person you share with can have a different set of rules. For example, your spouse may have immediate access to your private data, while your cousin may have a 48-hour wait period. Each person you share with is unique, and the data is encrypted specifically for them. Only they can read this data, and our system will allow only them to access it, following the rules that you set for them. Rest easy knowing that the right people have access to the right data when it's needed the most. For more information, visit helpyoufind.me, where you can start your free trial. Don't worry, there's no credit card required to create your account and start your free trial. Included in this is a 31-day trial period, 1 main account and 4 sub-accounts, 7 friend shares per account and all integrations. So visit helpyoufind.me or follow the link in the episode description and put your mind at ease today. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. Today's interview is with author Ronit Plank as we discuss her memoir When She Comes Back. Ronit has agreed to be the first author affiliated with the #Memoir Monday project that I am launching on the podcast across this month. All you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is follow me on Twitter or Instagram or subscribe on YouTube. Like and comment on any of the monthly content and your name will be automatically entered into a draw. At the end of the month, 3 people will be chosen at random to receive an exclusive and signed copy of Ronit's memoir about her mother leaving to join infamous cult leader Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. If you are commenting on YouTube, please leave your Instagram or Twitter handle so I can get in touch if you win. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find me at Cult Vault Pod, or on YouTube, I'm under the channel Cult Vault. So now, here is Ronit. Hi Ronit, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to bring this episode to the listeners, especially after I got the chance to read your memoir, When She Comes Back. This episode is important because it will focus on the impact felt by family members when a loved one leaves to join a high-demand control group, as opposed to gaining a perspective of the person who has become a member of this group. So would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Casey. And right before we pushed record, I was telling you how much I love the Cult Vault. I found your podcast a couple months ago and started binging. And I just fell in love with your content and with how you conduct your interviews and the depth that you go into. And then when we connected about this interview, I was so happy because I have this connection to your show before I got to be a guest. And so, I mean, I used to listen to your episodes and the guests and think, oh, wow, this is so interesting, their story. And I just love what they're talking about. And then here I am as a guest. So I want to thank you so much. And thank you for reading my book and getting my book and having me here in this space. So the question was to just introduce myself. So I am a mom and a teacher and a writer writer and a podcaster and a wife. And I was born in Israel on a kibbutz, which is sort of a communal type of work farm that these days has become a lot more capitalist, but at the time they were, socialist and very communal. And my parents, divorced when I was about 5, and we were in the States at that time. And when my father left to go to New Jersey to become to write the great American novel and resume his life, he left me and my sister and my mom in Seattle in a place where she really didn't know anyone and had no family and was on her own for the first time after living communally for her adult life as a mom. And basically, she started getting involved in a guru called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And that is where my family's story and my story took a very different turn and created the events that are the subject of my memoir, When She Comes Back, and basically set me on this trajectory of, I don't know, discovering who I am and struggling to figure out if I was valuable enough to stay with, and probably caused me to become an actor and to become a writer and to become the type of mom that I am.
That was such an incredible introduction. Just the first few lines where you said, I'm a teacher, I'm a mom, I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer. It sounds like you're a lady who wears many hats.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I was really interested when I started reading your book, and it began with you living in this kind of idyllic environment on this kibbutz in Israel. And I thought that sounds incredible. The setup that you described with the kind of the parents only kind of, you spend time with them for a couple of hours a day and the rest of the time you're kind of with all the other children. And
yes,
because some of the interviews that I've done and some of the books I've read, that is kind of similar to some of the environments that have been described as high demanding, coercive, controlling groups. But the way that you described it from your memories, from your perspective at such a young age, that's not how this environment came across particularly.
Yes, and I think it's a really important connection that you're making. And people have asked me about this because it's sort of it seems like the potentially good parts of communal living and intentional life. I will say from my perspective, what I know about the kibbutzim, which is plural in Hebrew for kibbutz. And, this is from my lens and what my father and what my mom told me, and other people might have a little bit of a different view, but there was an idealism when these kibbutzim were developed. It was, we will give you housing and a place to raise your children. The men and women will be equal. And you, in return for this life, will work on the kibbutz or work in the factory of the kibbutz, or, plant the crops that we will then sell as a kibbutz. It's a self-sustaining type of community. And it wasn't necessarily religious. In fact, it was really more secular. And there were kibbutzim that had older immigrants from Eastern Europe. There were kibbutzim that had a ton of Americans there. There were kibbutzim that had a mix. And so what I would say my parents went for was they left the States in 1968. They did some training on a New Jersey work farm, and then they moved to Israel. They sailed over there, and they had me a couple of years after they got there. And while they were on the kibbutz, my father worked the fields and then worked with the animals, and my mother worked in the kitchen as a cook. And the kids, as you mentioned, were cared for in a house called the Children's House. And they were cared for by minders who were called metapelot. Like a metapelot was, a metapelot was someone who cared for you like a counselor. And they would stay in a kid group with kids their age or babies their age most of the day, except for 2 hours every afternoon where the whole kibbutz community gathered together and took a break, sort of like a break in the day where all the workers would stop. The moms and dads would get together with their kids. But aside from that, after 6 weeks, I didn't sleep in my parents' flat. I didn't sleep, I stayed there for 6 weeks and then moved out as a baby to be in a crib with my counselors. I mean, well, the counselors weren't in the crib with the other babies, and my parents would visit me sometimes, but then I would see them only for 2 hours a day. And when people hear about this, they get a little, I think, confused or disturbed. I think some parents think, wow, that sounds like heaven, to not have to worry about my child all day long. And my father said that in his view, what he understood about kibbutz life was that the fathers on kibbutzim saw their children for a concentrated time and were like really, honed in on their child in ways that parents in the city, fathers in the city didn't have. And I think as parents now understand, if you have a job, if you're running a business, it's hard to give your kid that unfiltered attention. So I could see how if you had 2 hours of just the time with your kid and the community to rest and relax and tune in, that could be really good. I think, and I have a lot of feelings about this, it was mixed because for me, it was idyllic. It was all I knew and it was free and I felt kind of taken care of by the whole community. Now, I think attachment wise, it might have had a really big impact on my personal attachment to my mom and to my father. But at the same time, my confidence by, being supported by a community and knowing where everyone was going to be at any given time was such it buoyed me. And I think that it created in me this sort of ability to take care of myself and be independent and feel like I was going to be okay no matter what. I think I was plucky. I would walk home from the children's house by myself after the age of 2. I would just leave and go to my parents' flat, a couple of blocks worth of the community. It was fine. There's no fear at all. And I do wonder though what it was like for my mom and my father to not have to see me all the time, because when they got to the States and they were full time in charge of me, especially my mom, it was a real shock. And it I think contributed to her depression along with the crumbling marriage, to suddenly be home with your child all day long after being cradled by a community and social times with your peers all the time, But yes, I think the parallels between a cultic type of environment and a kibbutz could be drawn. And I'm sure you are more of an expert on this than I am, but just that communal life, the expectations of the group, the kind of schedule that's rigid, and the idea that everyone is the same and no one is special, those come to mind right away for me.
Yeah. And when I was reading the first kind of chapters of the book and tried to imagine the environment not through the eyes of this really confident, strong-minded, tiny little person as you were describing yourself, I was trying to imagine what it must be like for the community overall, because just through research about groups like Synanon, who had a similar kind of parents don't live with their children, the children live separately, parents, the big difference was that with Synanon, parents were discouraged from seeing their children, full stop. Their children were taken care of by somebody else or other people, and the parents were actively told that they shouldn't want to spend time with the children.
Yes, and actually, I have to interject. Do you know about Mikel Jolet's memoir Hollywood Park? Because he's a child of Synanon couple.
No,
and so
I don't. That sounds amazing.
Yes, I can tell you all about it. He was on my podcast, and he's lovely, and he's in a band, and he spends the beginning of his memoir through the child view of waking up and not seeing his parents, and he left and was taken by, he was taken out of there when he was really little, but he remembers what it was like there. And he remembers not being in touch with his parents and not even understanding what they were supposed to be like in his life.
Yeah. That must be so confusing because just now, with my daughter being so young, she will cry because she wants a cuddle or because she needs feeding. So as you grow up and you still kind of expect to have that support from your parents, that biological kind of support, it must be so confusing to try and work through that. And that'd be really interesting to read, actually, because there's not that much material I've come across from the perspective of children that lived on the commune, as opposed to adults that experienced the
Right.
Synanon and then moved away.
Well,
So that
exactly.
would be
And it
great.
was interesting because you're talking about this idea of cult and kibbutz and commune and intentional living. And I remember during our interview, at one point I said to him, I said something to Mikkel about, where you lived. And it was kind of like this organization. He said very, very straightforward and very sharply, he said, it was a cult. Make no mistake, it was a cult. And I think that people who have experienced that want to be sure people understand that this idea of living collectively and following a leader can get really tricky. And in fact, a friend of my husband's recently texted him post COVID, or I guess we're starting COVID again, but post COVID, and said, hey, let's go spend a week on an ashram. And I was like, what? Like, I just can't separate the dogma and the nefariousness from something like that. I have no interest in that whatsoever. And I do think that the other part that you're mentioning about the early childhood attachment and what it would be like to not have your kids be able to cling to you, and as they get older to realize, they still need you. I don't think I understood. And I think Mikkel may have a similar feeling about this. I don't think I understood until later that wanting to be close to your parents and needing that physical support, or even that emotional ongoing link where they really were there for you and understood that you had an ongoing need from them. I don't think I either knew that about myself, accepted it about myself, or even honored that. I just didn't have room. And I'm not going to lay the blame squarely at their feet, because it could be a nature versus nurture thing. I grew up with this very strong sense of who I was for the first 5 years. And I guess I felt I was fine. But later on, when I wasn't fine and when it was a struggle and when I didn't feel supported, I think I didn't understand that I was supposed to have that, and I wasn't supposed to be alone in growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that comes across so perfectly in your writing. You really do get a sense of knowing that kind of that tiny person, and then going through that experience of you growing up and kind of feeling awkward and trying to find your way through, and not really knowing if the way you're doing things is right, or that really did come through. And I was reading the book, and as I was going through it, I was feeling like, and I mentioned this in the email to you, I was remembering parts about my childhood that were awkward and clunky and kind of felt really like I didn't know if I should try and go one way or go the other. And that definitely came through in your writing. But then on top of that, you've got the added sort of like, where is mum? Is she going to come back? Dad's got a new partner. How do I feel about them? So that's definitely stuff that we're going to get into a bit more. But the point there, I think the kibbutz sounds like it has some elements of familiarity around cultic themes, like you mentioned before. But Synanon, you didn't even get those 2 hours of unbridled attention from your parents. I think it would be, I try and think about it from my perspective as well, because all day I'm thinking, okay, my kids get up at this time, this is what they need, then they need this, then they need this, then they need this, then they go to bed. And then I'm kind of thinking, okay, what does the podcast need? The podcast needs this, then it needs this. And if I had 2 hours a day where I didn't have to worry about what they were eating, or if they needed changing, or if it was bath time, I imagine that I would probably really appreciate the time with them a lot more. And everybody always says, oh, love them while they're young, because they grow up so fast.
Yes, which is really a difficult thing. It's like that's a tricky thing when people say that. I think a lot of moms especially kind of have a mixed feeling about that comment. When we hear, oh, the days are long, but the years go fast, because, you know it, but you don't really know it. And that really can't stop the feelings of overwhelm or frustration when they're happening. It only works sometimes to like calm yourself down, take a deep breath and realize, try to just enjoy this right now. Yep. This is important. I can stop stop my editing right now for a minute. My kid is in my desk area. He wants to talk to me. Okay, let me do that, because that is not going to stay forever. And so then I can kind of compartmentalize a little bit. But I never like that comment as a way to make parents feel like their feelings of irritation or feeling saturated are wrong, or they're not entitled to them. I mean, that's part of the work I feel like I've done through growing and therapy and writing the book and being married and trying to come to a whole new understanding of what I need and who I am, is that all of our feelings are valid, all of them. And that's not something I really understood growing up. And so in writing the book, I tried really hard to strike a balance between telling the story as it was unfolding, but also with the lens and the insight I have now about what those things meant to me then and how I'm interpreting them now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, mum guilt is rife enough as it is.
Right.
I say to my partner, I'm gonna go get a shower, and I'm like, is that okay? And he's like, of course that's okay. And I'm like, okay, I'll be really, really, really quick. And then if I hear the baby cry while I'm in the shower, I'm like, oh no, hurry up,
Oh,
hurry up.
yes.
So,
Well,
mum
it doesn't
guilt's
really
real.
end, because Casey, yesterday we were getting ready for a birthday party, and like family's coming and it's going to get a little hectic. And I said to my husband, I really want to take a bath. I really need to do a lot of things, but I kind of want to take a bath. Forget it. I won't take a bath. And he said, just take a bath. Things are about to get really hectic. Just go relax and take a bath. And sometimes it takes your partner or someone who really loves you, to tell you that so that you believe it, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
did. I took the bath and I was like, the world didn't fall apart.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to take care of yourself in those situations, and when you're kind of feeling the anticipation of, sometimes I know my kids are going to get up at 6 a.m, so I wake up at 5 o'clock and I lay there staring at the ceiling like my kids are going to wake up at any minute now. But I think that the main point to draw from that is, if you had those 2 hours of not worrying about all of that stuff to just enjoy your children, I can see why that would be appealing for parents. And you mentioned before that it was a whole community that you felt safe in, and that definitely came across in your book when you mentioned kind of knocking on every door on the way home and saying, I need a snack. And everyone would be like, okay. And we used to have there was a little cat that lived in on our street that used to go all the way, and she was a big chunky cat, and she used to go every house, and then she'd be like, out your back
Casey,
door, and
are you
would
comparing
know.
me? You're comparing me to a kitty, which is
No.
fine. I do. I love cats, and I agree 100%. I think for years, and maybe even still now, residually, when I go over to someone's house, for years, I'd look on the table, look on the coffee table, any snacks.
Yeah.
Do you have a bowl of candy like my grandmother? I just am so food oriented, and memories are so anchored by food for me. And I definitely believe food is love. And, I feel like I can't escape my associations with food. So definitely, I think I was asking for some food and attention on my way home when I was, 3 years old.
Yeah. And it's just so wholesome and innocent. And that, I remember my primary school teacher, she would, so kindergarten, I guess, she would, I'd say, I haven't had any breakfast, because I know she kept biscuits in her top drawer, and she'd be like, oh, here, have some cookies. I'll be like, thank you.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that was me when I was 5. I wouldn't be knocking on everybody's houses, but I would be like, oh, my parents don't feed me. So
that's very clever.
Yeah, but when my parents got a phone call asking if they'd been feeding me breakfast, that wasn't cool.
That wasn't good. You were discovered, but it sounds like you and I would have been friends.
Yeah, I think so. And then you mentioned as well the attachment side of things with your parents, that maybe you missed out on the early attachment forming, and I guess the thing about living on this community, children need routine. I'd be nowhere with parenting if I didn't have a routine.
Yeah.
Like breakfast time, same time every day, bath time, same time every day. And you mentioned that you live in this community where you know what to expect. You know where
Mm.
people live, where they're going, you know where they do their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
You know that where your mum is, she's cooking, she's working in, preparing food for people. You know what children live around you and what their names
Yes.
are and what their ages are. And so you are living in this environment that as a child is very routine based, and you know what to expect, and you understand that that is your life. So I can imagine it must have been so carefree. And that
Yeah.
transition over to America, where even your parents didn't have that routine or that familiarity or that understanding that this is what happens at this time, this is what happens
Mm.
at this time, like to have all of that taken away from them, and to have that taken away from you, and then just be
Mm.
like, now we are like a quote nuclear family living
Oh,
without
it
that
was
community.
such a shock to the system. And I think that was one of the bigger surprises when I was writing the book, because I've told some of these stories my whole life. I know them. I know them because they're part of our history. And to take a closer look at some of the circumstances was troubling sometimes and also a gift. And I didn't really understand or put my finger on how abrupt and painful leaving Israel would have been and was for me. Because, when you're a child, if you have fairly attentive parents, parents who are doing what they're supposed to do, you just follow them. Well, you have to follow them no matter what kind of parents you have. If you have no one but your parents, if you have your parents or a caregiver. And as a child, you're so incredibly vulnerable. And that still kills me about life, is how vulnerable the young are,
Mm-hmm.
or those who don't have enough resources, how vulnerable we all are on the people who guide us and take care of us. And I've always been an animal lover. I've always been, I've always loved to take care of children. And I feel like to watch myself come into this new country, a new set of circumstances, to not even know what was in store for me. At the time, I never would have wallowed at all, not at all. I just would have, forged ahead. But now I can look back with a lot more sympathy and patience for myself and realize, oh my goodness, you had no idea what was about to happen. And there's a photo which I think I put on my Instagram page, and I'll probably repost it again, of me in my children's center, like my children's house class, sitting next to my mom. It's black and white, and it's just before we leave. It's like an early birthday party for me and a goodbye. I'm not yet 4. And you can see me looking at the camera. I'm in a little dress. I can tell I knew that I looked cute that day. Like my stomach fit into my clothes because I was always bigger than the other kids and, towered over them. And there I am with my hair in a sweet little bob, and I'm sitting next to my mom, and you can just see on my face that I know something's about to change. Something is about to change. Like you can just see, I'm like, okay, what's going on? This is a goodbye party. Everyone's making a big fuss, and I still didn't fully understand the other shoe was about to drop. And the other shoe was, let's leave this country, all your friends, the environment the dog you had. Let's go to this cold city where we know nobody, Seattle, Washington, and we have no support. And and we're going to have this family. And my parents were not happy with each other. And I didn't know that, but I knew it. I felt it. And I tried to convey that in the book. And I feel that we all would do well to remember that kids pick up on a lot of our energy.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I learned as a parent, 4 or 5 years into parenting, I learned from the preschool teacher was it's okay to tell your kid how you're feeling, even if it's a not happy feeling, even if it is one of frustration. I don't think my parents ever said to us, and part of that was the era, we're talking like late 70s and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They never said, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, or I'm really frustrated, or when you throw that book at, the floor, it really makes me angry. It hurts my feelings. Nothing. And so there I was just kind of reading faces and trying to vibe out what was happening. And I was good at that. I don't know how many times I was wrong, but I know that I was right when I felt anger in my mom, distance in my mom, sadness between my mom and father. My father was less around. It was just like the world was coming, it was crashing. And part of what I hesitated about writing the book when I was in my graduate program for writing, I felt that certainly my story is not a hard story compared to others, that certainly people have it worse than this. I had a parent present ultimately. I had a roof over my head. I never starved. I haven't borne a lot of prejudice against my, I passed for white. I just didn't, I knew that my story wasn't dire. And so I hesitated to write it. But then in my program and with my teacher, I came to understand that all of our stories matter. And if you don't tell your story, somebody else will tell it for you, or they won't tell it at all. And so why shouldn't you tell your story? And in reading the responses from readers and messages that I get, I see that people who have had similar upbringings are happy to read the story and see a reflection of their experience. And people who didn't have this exact situation, but had mental illness in a parent, or had emotional abandonment, or had alcoholism in their family that riddled the dynamic and made them lose out on so much connection, they see themselves in this story. And so it has offered something, even though it was just one story. And so I think that, that's a little bit of my soapbox about telling our stories, but also that it has been so therapeutic for me to go back and look at the life I had that I got through, waiting for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, but being able as an adult to really kind of spend time there and slow down those moments and feel them from the security of my adult life that I get to control.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these stories where people have gone through these experiences and have come out of the other side and had to do a lot of work to get themselves into a more favorable position, whether that's financially or with mental health. A lot of that does come down to sort of accepting things that have happened, but knowing that it's okay to talk about them once they get kind of to the stage that they're comfortable to have those discussions and speak out, because I know that there must be so many people that have had these experiences that don't want to come and speak, that would never come on a podcast and talk about things. So I hope that there is some other way that those people get to tell their stories in some way. Whether
yes, and I think
writing their own journals and keeping those journals to themselves.
Yeah, but that's part of the work that you're doing too. Hearing other people tell their stories has to be helping those who have been cult survivors or cult adjacent. That people understand this, and even if they're not ready to tell their story yet, which I wasn't necessarily. In fact, I just got a letter from my mother-in-law. I'm sorry, my mother-in-law's friend. I think she's 96 now, this woman who I met when who I met before I got married in LA. And then I met when my daughter was a baby, my first. And we've kept in touch here and there, but she sent me a letter. I just got it, an actual post office letter that says, I had no idea about your story until I read your book. You just were my friend's new daughter-in-law. And I didn't know anything except that you seemed nice and that you were in this young couple. And she said, thank you for writing the book, et cetera, nice words. But here I was just living my life. I wasn't ready or interested in going back and unpacking all this. But I've changed so much over the last decades. And I've come to a place where I was able to look at this, whether it was because of where I am in my marriage, as a mom, as my development, my development as an artist, or just as someone who's ready to be vulnerable. I think it's the vulnerability that allowed me to do it. And so not everyone's ready to do it. Everyone's on their own path, and there's no right or wrong. But if the people who come on your podcast who are willing to go and be vulnerable like this help maybe fortify the people who are not yet ready, then that's also a gift.
Yeah. And the emails and comments on YouTube videos and things like that come through the podcast definitely reflect everything that you've just said, which is wonderful. A few people will email and say, I was also in that group, but in a different part of America. Could you connect me with the person that was a guest on your show? So there's some great connections.
Very healing,
which is amazing to be a part of. But your mother, when you spoke about her in your book, there was obviously I felt a certain level of empathy with you as a child. With talking about not always fitting in your clothes and feeling uncomfortable and putting baggy sweaters over your clothes, so that you wouldn't feel as uncomfortable. And there were parts of your book with you growing up that I definitely identified with. But then I also felt so I felt I felt kind of sorry for your mom in the early parts of the book, because she did go through this experience with your father, and they did end up with the divorce, but she's moved from this environment, this community environment in Israel, over to America. The weather itself is completely different. There's no predictability anymore. There's no routine. She decides to stay home. So she's in the house all day when she's used to cooking for however many people lived in this community and being busy all the
Hundreds,
time.
yeah.
And she seemed like a very strong-headed, very lively, like go-getting woman who is now kind of in this house with two children that she is with full time, that she's going to support, which I understand people listening might be thinking, well, that's what I do every day, but it's the huge transition, the huge shift,
Yes,
and the shock that must have brought for your mum must have been so difficult. And it definitely comes across in your writing when you talk about how she became increasingly frustrated. You can feel in the writing, you can feel her getting more and more almost claustrophobic, to the point where she makes a decision for herself that takes her out of that environment. And I suppose that's the next part for us to talk about.
yes, and I feel like you really summed that up wonderfully, and I'm really happy that you were able to get that from the writing. And a couple of points is that yes, my mom, when we came to the States, didn't even know how to write a check. She had left her mother's home as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, and then she'd moved to a farm in New Jersey, met my dad, and then moved to this communal living. And so basically from the age of 19 to 29, 28, she didn't live alone. She didn't have an adult life in America. And when they came to the States, my dad was in graduate school, and I want to just make sure I spend a second on this. She didn't necessarily choose to stay home. I think that they talked about it, and there didn't seem to be another option. And my father, in recent years, I think just last year, said to me, he never should have said that she should stay home with the kids, that she was a social woman, and she should have had a job, that he should have seen that her being in the world and having a job would have made a lot more sense for her, that maybe they should have spent the money that they were saving by not getting a babysitter on a babysitter so my mom could go into the world. I mean, I think about all the different the choices people make, and how it affected us. Because another regret that my father had is that he left Seattle and went to New Jersey and left my mom with us. And he told me this last February, that was his biggest regret, that he didn't stay in Seattle and try to work it out, that he left the family. And so it's amazing, right? What you get out of people when you write a memoir, and then if your family is still talking to you, which I know we'll talk about that later, you can get all these like gold nuggets. But yes, happy to move on to the next part, which is, the growing frustration my mom felt.
And then she meets a friend that talks more and more about this kind of group that they've been introduced to.
Yes.
And this is where your life kind of changes completely, not just moving from Israel to America, but having your primary caregiver leave the country again, but just not with you in tow.
Exactly. So she met a friend who introduced her to the tapes that Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was recording and putting out, and the books. And my mom, alone in a city, not feeling healthy or good, scraping together money, completely isolated with these two young children, starts to read the books and listen to the tapes. And she finds something there that is promising. And she tells me now that she was looking for enlightenment. She was looking to feel better. She didn't feel good, and she wanted to feel better. And ironically, the man who introduced her to Bhagwan didn't go and follow him for any great length at all. And I remember for years being really ticked off at this guy. Like, why did you have to bring this guru into my mom's life? But of course, I used to also blame Bhagwan for existing, which, I'm not happy that he existed. But the blame lies with, my mom. Like, she left, not everyone would leave, and she did. But that was part of what I wanted to create in the book, which I appreciate that you felt that sympathy for my mom, is that there is no just one side to a story. I could write a book where I'm talking about how my mom is evil and cruel and left to go to India and didn't care about us, and write a story like that. But I try to put the reader into the shoes of my mom and my father and us, because it's a multi-dimensional story. And, I'm not saying I would want to go to India or that I agree with her decision to go to India, but I wasn't living her life. I wasn't in that situation. And the situation, I think, was crushing, and where is a person who doesn't have the fortitude gonna get it to stay put? And, if you think about it, she had been left in Seattle with us, and my father left her there. So I could see how after 8 or 9 months or a year, she'd say, it's probably your turn to take the kids, ex-husband. It's your turn. I want to go to India. I'm going to go for the summer. So that's all it started out as. And in the book, I talk about going to meditations and centers where Bhagwan and his people, not Bhagwan himself, but his tapes and his books were talked about, and being a young kid watching these adults kind of zoned out and not really paying attention to us, which was really, I'm so curious. I'll be really happy to know what listeners think about this, because I think this is like a theme. When we came in to the room, me and my little sister, I was 5.5. She was 2.5, 3. Adorable, my sister. No one was rushing over to us and embracing us or really coddling us that I remember. It was really just about the adults. And that was part of what Bhagwan, extolled. And I think I knew, even at that young age, which I write about, that something wasn't quite right. There wasn't a real connection in their eyes. There wasn't any real appreciation for children the way lots of groups will appreciate children, families, extended families. Oh, there's a child here. Let's make some room. Nothing like that at all. And so I think that when she dropped us off in New Jersey, which is how the book begins, that's the prologue, is the airport scene, which was one of the first memories of that kind of trauma that I absorbed. There was a couple in the early scenes, but that was one of them. She left, and there she went to go to India to follow Bhagwan, and she was supposed to come back at the end of the summer. So that's painful, but not unrelenting. Mm-hmm. Until she decided to not come back. And that's, that began the separation in my life from my mother.
And I wonder if the promise of community is also something that kind of spoke to your mom as well when she was listening to or hearing about what was happening over in India. So I suppose it should, for some of the listeners that might not be familiar with this movement or may not have watched the popular Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country, so there might be some people listening who aren't sure who Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh is. So I don't know if you could give us kind of a brief
Yes,
summary.
I will give you a little bit, and then if you have anything you'd like to add, I'd love to hear what you found, because you approach things in a different way than I do, because I got what I needed for my story, and you might have a little more of an academic background on it. But Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh came up in India. He was doing lectures and becoming more and more popular, and this would be in the 70s. He was a scholar. He was a student and then a professor at university, and he began to develop a following. And he started to work with something he coined dynamic meditation. And dynamic meditation became sort of a core element of a lot of other cults. And this was a way to sort of get out of your body and transport yourself. And it had to do with moving your body and until exhaustion and breathing heavily and a whole bunch of other things that you can see footage of in Wild Wild Country. So he started with that, and his following just grew and grew, and he was really attracting Westerners, tons and tons of Westerners. I know that there was a branch in the UK. There was a branch in lots of different places. And so tons of people would come to India and they would give up their possessions and their life. They would donate to him and his ashram. And there were thousands, I believe, eventually on the ashram and around the ashram in Pune. And one element of his practice was that you should have sex as much as you want. You should have sex with as many partners as you want. And I didn't understand until I was 40 that he was actually called the sex guru. And I didn't know that. All this time my mom had gone to follow this guru. I didn't really like him very much, but I had no idea at all that she was following what was known as the sex guru, which really put a different angle on it. The other thing that was required was that I don't know that he said you must do this, but he highly recommended vasectomies and sterilization for his followers, because the idea was to focus on him, which I think is very, prevalent amongst cult leaders, is they need their followers to focus on them and the movement and to separate their attachment to family and friends who would maybe draw them in. And so it was recommended that you don't bring your kids to the ashram. You don't carry them with you. You don't have kids. But if you are going to bring them, they're going to stay separately from you. They're going to stay in a house, similar in a sense to the children's house. And so I asked my mom if she ever saw kids running around on the ashram, if she ever noticed kids, because I thought, when she saw kids, did she remember, oh yeah, I have a couple of those in New Jersey, where are my kids? Or what was her feeling about that? And she says she doesn't recall seeing them. So, you have to remember, I guess she's in her late 20s, early 30s, and she's there for herself. Someone I interviewed for my podcast was the child of a father who was at the UK house for Bhagwan. And when she would see him on weekends, she said that the adults would kind of sit around with stuffed animals and teddy bears and plush toys in their lap. They'd be sucking their thumb. There was this idea of regression. And she was around that sexual activity as well. And she also noticed that the adolescents and the very young adolescents who had not yet gone through puberty were very sexualized. So the kids who were on the grounds with their parents were already very sexualized. So that's some of the background on Bhagwan.
And he had interest. It's just interest. This is just something that I drew on personally. And I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode before. When they moved kind of over to Oregon more so, when in the documentary Wild Wild Country, when you see Mara and Sheila on the telly, who is kind of Bhagwan's right hand woman, his number two, or whichever phrase you'd like to apply, she is so charismatic herself that I almost felt like, and it was interesting reading your book, because I've started reading one of the biographies on Bhagwan that you mentioned in your book, one of the texts that you've read, and then some of the stuff you mentioned about Bhagwan and the messages and themes that he endorsed throughout his leadership of the group were very, very different to the way that Wild Wild Country presented Bhagwan. They almost presented him as if he had no culpability in anything that happened, and then it was all Mara and Sheila who orchestrated everything, and she did everything for Bhagwan on his behalf.
Yes, I saw that too. I felt that too, the way they portrayed him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember watching it and thinking, this is not in line with what I've read or what I know about Bhagwan, but also, like, in the stuff I've read, I didn't realize how charismatic Sheila was either. So I'm starting to think that they probably or potentially bolstered each other in their ideas on building things and moving things forward.
And it might have been very convenient to pass the baton when you wanted to, or when something was a little more dangerous or authoritative. Like, it might be very nice to say, well, that was her, which I think he did do. And to just to try to make yourself like not culpable at all. I wrote an essay that The Atlantic published about, and I don't know, I think I mentioned this in the book too, but just the idea of the way Wild Wild Country portrayed the children and families, or the way they didn't. They had 6 hours. I mean, six series, 6 parts of this series, and they didn't spend any time, and they had lots of interviews, and they went
Mm-hmm.
deep with some of these people. No time about the repercussions on families, no time about the sterilizations, no time on the developing of, the AIDS vaccine in a lab, no talk about parents and how they were encouraged to leave their kids and what the repercussions were for families. And that really
Mm-hmm.
irked me. And so I wrote a piece about it because I felt like, hey, you missed a really big part of this story. And I understand. And this goes back to the idea of storytelling and the lens that you're looking at things through. If if I didn't say anything about that, there would be people that wouldn't even realize that this part was missing from the story. You have to, you know what I mean? Like my
That is
perspective
very
is,
true. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, they didn't even, and I did get reached, someone did reach out to me and said, hey, I read your piece and I agree with you. I don't know what happened to
No.
that part of the story.
And it was only when I read that particular paragraph in your book that I realized after watching the documentary that you're right. I don't remember seeing any children. I don't remember the arrangements for children.
No.
I don't know if the young adults had roles to play within building the community over in the States, because
Well,
there's a lot about Sheila talking about how brilliant it was,
yes.
and but I've
Where were
yeah.
they? I mean, you just see the adults. And the thing is, there were adolescent kids there. There were a little younger than adolescent kids. And every time footage was shown of the Rancho Rajneesh, because I guess we've sort of pivoted over to the Oregon site. So I should mention that after India, Ma Anand Sheila, his right-hand woman, and Bhagwan, they found this place. She found this property, the Big Muddy Ranch in Oregon, in Antelope, Oregon, and they put money on it. They bought it, and they created what was called Rajneeshpuram, or Rancho Rajneesh, which was a whole giant sprawling community, which we can talk about. But when I was watching footage of building the community and people lining up to see him drive by in his Rolls Royce, because that's the other thing, he's called the Rolls Royce guru. He had 96 Rolls Royces, and he would, when he was feeling healthy, he would drive through on the one road and people would throw flowers at him. But every time I was doing two things watching this series: scanning for my mom to
Mm-hmm.
see if I could find her amongst the followers, and looking for children. I just wanted to know. And I didn't see either.
Yeah, yeah. I think I hadn't realized that until you mentioned it, that there were no children, and I realized after kind of reading a little bit about the movement and about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh before watching the documentary, and then realizing that they didn't really mention the HIV
Mm.
strain that they were trying to turn into kind of like a bioweapon.
Hmm.
Obviously, they talk a little bit about the salmonella,
Salmonella.
which we can discuss a little bit later on. But it's my understanding that he had to flee India because people were unhappy with him because he'd racked up loads of like unpaid tax.
Yes, I mean, this is the thing. There are two questions about cult leaders. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I love the fact that you're so well informed and that your listenership is so well informed. I could learn so much from you and from them. My first question is it possible to become a leader of a spiritual movement or maybe even a giant company and not become a megalomaniac? Is it possible to not believe your own bullshit? I don't know. Second of all, how come these leaders always get themselves into trouble? Like what the US government got Bhagwan for, how they got him out of the country eventually and had him sent back to India was, let's see, voter fraud, drug smuggling, wiretapping, and really one of the biggest reasons they got him out was because they were able to say that he had immigration fraud, that he had not come to the country under the circumstances he said he did. And so I just think there was all this stuff that he did, and all this dangerous irresponsibility with where he was living and what he was doing with these children and allowing this to be like the ethos. It was just this strange, sprawling, irresponsible grown-up summer camp, and what they were
Yeah.
shipping in homeless people to try to create more volume in their community, all these things. But the only way the government could really get him out was for like the immigration fraud and the drug smuggling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I It's one of those that I think it's on the surface, people that watch the documentary, their initial reaction might be like, oh my goodness, look at these therapy sessions that or meditation sessions that the participants are having, where they roll around naked on the floor and make like really carnal animal noises and have like really rampant sex in front of each other, or really violent outbursts of like punching each other, and the kind of weird footage that had never really been seen by anybody before. I think that was the biggest takeaway for a lot of people that had never heard of the movement before watching the documentary. But of course, there are all of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah,
And
and
by
my
the
mom,
time he moved from India to America, he had thousands of Western followers.
thousands. And you know, my mom, it's important to note that my mom in India, she said that she did not see those sessions, that they weren't being conducted when she was there. You know, so I think it was before then. I mean, she did walk on hot coals, and you know, I'm sure she had a lot of, you know, quote relationships and stuff, but I really don't know. She doesn't talk about that with me, which is probably a godsend. But it, you know, the recipe is all there for media attention and infatuation with this story. You've got an Indian guru, you've got Westerners flocking to him, you've got rampant sex, you've got you must wear the colors of the sunset. You've got like communal living and people leaving their homes and their families. It's just so salacious and so tempting. And to see footage of those therapy sessions, those brutal therapy sessions, and to see all these grown-ups acting like they found God, you know, that he is God. It's just to all be acting as a group, you know, it's the cult experience, and it's captivating. But the media scrutiny, the attention, all the articles written, even the sketches on SNL, none of that talks about, you know, the child side of it, of course, you know, because that's a little more complicated. And I also think it's an interesting experience as a child of someone who is involved. And I think other cult survivors or kids of cult survivors could attest to this, to see your story or part of your story be consumed in the media, to see it as a punchline or to see it depicted in a way that wasn't exactly your experience. That is a slightly unnerving feeling.
Yeah, I can absolutely, see how that would be. I wonder how your mum felt as well when she realized that this documentary was going to be released or made, or when people started talking about it and she caught wind of what it was. And I wonder for her how that must have felt. I wonder if she watched it through, wondered if she'd see herself hoping that she would or hoping that she wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, it must be really strange for people to have experienced both communes and then to see how they're depicted on screen, because I'm sure that the experiences weren't anything like what us as consumers were fed by the documentary team.
Mm-hmm.
And now, a quick message from the company sponsoring the podcast over the month of September. HelpYouFind.me. Help You Find Me is a safe and encrypted if I go missing file that you can securely share with the people you trust the most. Help You Find Me is a secure yet simple way to share private data for use in emergency situations. All data is end-to-end encrypted and accessible only by the people you choose to share it with. Not even the staff at Help You Find Me can access this information. You can visit their website, helpyoufind.me today to start a free trial, or you can use the code HYFMCOLT to get a 20% discount. Using this code will also support the podcast. That's helpyoufind.me/HYFMCOLT, or follow the link in the episode description and put your mind at ease today. another parallel as well that I drew with Synanon when I was reading your book is that vasectomies were absolutely another thing that were encouraged. And also with a really horrible group called the Anthill Kids. And I don't know, I talk about them a little bit on the show because I did like a deep dive series on my Patreon about the Anthill Kids, and that man, Rock Terrio, the leader of that group, just some of the worst stuff you will ever read. He was just absolutely one of the most evil people, and he also encouraged vasectomies from the other men, because he would pair off women that he had, air quotes, married. He would pair them off with men in the group, and he would split marriages up and reassign partners to other people. And then once all the women had bared his children, he would then say, okay, you two will be married now, but this person will have a vasectomy. So yeah, really
Wow. The long game is, I feel like they're not really looking at the long game. If you encourage vasectomies and you really do think you're going to take over the world or have a whole new way of living, what's the outcome ultimately? What's your plan for progeny, right? It just doesn't make sense.
So your mum has told you that she's going away for the summer, and your father has decided that you will go and stay with him. And there's this moment in the airport where you are reconnected with your father, who's moved to New Jersey. You haven't seen him for a while. So there's that touching moment in the airport. And then I wonder at that moment where your mum kind of turns away and walks in the other direction whilst you and your sister are reunited with your father. I wonder how that moment felt for her, if there was any level of apprehension or whether she just felt relieved to have the responsibility of childcare just instantly removed from her life. I don't know if that's a discussion you've had with her or if you have any kind of guesses on how she felt at that moment. But I remember reading the book, sitting there thinking, I wonder how this feels for your father. And I also wonder how your mum felt kind of walking away at that moment.
Well, I haven't had that discussion, but it's a good question. And I don't think I've ever asked her that. So thank you. My guess would be, if I know my mom and, the version of her back then would be, get through the airport and walk away as fast as you can. And it might not have even been a conscious, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. It may not have even been that way. I think my mom had developed some shields to protect herself. And I'm sure at that point she just had to go. I mean, I'm sure she just had to go, but I can't be certain. And I certainly would never want to completely speak for her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is another thing that I think you do really well in the book, as well as you go through, is make sure that you're not saying, this is how my mum felt at this time, this is why she did these things.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you always say like, I wonder
right
how she felt at this time. But I'm not sure. And I don't know if you've heard of I interviewed a lady called Lisa whose mum had similar experiences with her mum. When I read her memoir To the Moon and Back, about her experiences with the Unification Church and her mum joining.
I know her.
Fantastic. So there was a lot of similarities between how she yearned for her mother so much, and she would her mum would go off and look after other church members' children whilst leaving her with her father. And all she thought about was her mum, getting back to her mum, having that relationship with her mum. What could she do to please her, making sure she didn't say things to upset her when they did get a little bit of time together. So a lot of the time when you were talking about those moments, it sounded a lot like what Lisa had experienced as well. So
Yes, I want
Um,
to read her book. I just recently got in touch with her. I think she's going to come on the podcast as well. And I think that, it sounds funny, but I really didn't understand how important attachment was. I really didn't understand parental attachment and, parentification when the kids are sort of turned into the partner
yes,
or the
yeah, yeah,
adult. I didn't even know
hmm
that term
yeah,
until recently. And that idea of insecure childhood attachment, like I wrote my thesis on it once I started to understand this in my graduate coming of age memoirs, which had a lot to do with parents who don't seem to be involved or that connected, and these kids who become hypervigilant. And so that's an area of great interest for me in writing and also in life, is this inverse relationship between how out to lunch or unable a parent is to care for their kids emotionally or maybe physically, and how hypervigilant and watchful the children get. It's really interesting.
hmm Yeah, yeah. I think you would really enjoy reading Lisa's work, and she's such a beautiful woman as well, and she's so insightful and just a delight to speak with. She's like a high energy, like great
Uh,
outlook on everything, really positive, and yeah, I think if you two kind of when you connect, you'll have just a really great spark, I think, and definitely a lot in common. But your mum has gone to India for the summer. She kind of goes off to have that adventure, and you're with your father, who has a new partner at this point, and she has her
mhm,
own children, and
mhm.
you're all put in this room together. And there's a lot in the book about those thoughts and feelings around adjusting to kind of having a step family almost. And then your mum doesn't come back after the summer, but she does come back at some point.
Mhm. Yes, she comes back almost a year later because her mom is ill, is dying. She has breast cancer, and my mom came to help, which, her mom and her had a very difficult relationship and not a healthy one at all. And so I'm sure that was a very difficult thing for my mom. She has a sister and a brother as well, but my mom was the oldest girl. And also pretty much the punching bag. I mean, several of the children were punching bags for my grandmother, but my mom sort of really got a lot of it. And so my mom came back and she ended up staying in the New York area, and we started to see her on weekends. And we still lived with our father, though. We continued to live with our father. And then uh, about the time I was 12, after seeing my mom on the weekends, she started talking about Bhagwan again, and met someone who introduced her to the latest iteration, which was Rancho Rajneesh and Antelope. And I remember my mom talking about it and realizing, huh, because I really thought it was over. I thought it was a blip. You couldn't have written a better punchline than to think that, okay, I've got the status quo with my family and my mom is now going to leave again. And so she went out for the summer again to Rancho Rajneesh. And,
Mm-hmm.
we'd all been there before, right? So I'm about 12 and a half. My sister is 9 and a half, almost 10 when that happened. And that whole time we're living with my father in Queens. And this was another part of the book that I found to be new again for me when I explored what the loss of my relationship with my father was like. Because one thing we didn't touch on that I didn't mention is when I did see my father in Seattle, when he was around and not in graduate school, he was a good dad. I mean, he was tender and funny and cozy and took me canoeing and let me be the captain. And we always brought bread for the ducks and took me to Star Wars, even though I was probably way too young for that. Took us, inner tubing down a mountain of snow, like, fun stuff, like good bonding stuff that was, this time is for you and me. But what started off as an adventure in Queens, when he decided we would live with him, just the three of us, became over the next years oppressive and difficult for me because I took on the role of partner to my father. I took on the role of, the cook for dinner, the
Mm-hmm.
caretaker for my sister, and tried in some ways to be my father's peer. And in some ways, he allowed me to do that because I was pretty mature, sophisticated, and grabbed these roles. I was bringing him coffee in the morning to his bedroom. I was, you know, doing the laundry, for the family, things like that. And I did hit a time at around 11 where I realized that I was growing uncomfortable with it. As I became more mature and was coming of age, I didn't like the intimacy. I didn't like the closeness. And I felt I had to protect myself and hide from it
Mm-hmm.
because, especially once my mom was not in the picture, it became excruciating to think that I had vied for this role of, peer to my father when I didn't want anything less than to be his partner or the mom figure in the house. And so, what I always knew about my story was that I lost my mom. But what I didn't know about my story was how much I had lost with my father.
Yeah.
I lost this closeness and this feeling of safety and this you and us against the world, like dad and me and my sister against the world. It was so cute for a little while. It was enough for a
Mm-hmm.
while.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I came of age and we were stuck in this apartment and I was waiting for things to change, it became, really difficult and painful.
That absolutely comes across in your writing as well. You mentioned that you didn't want to be the partner in the home, you didn't want to be the mother figure, but at the same time you're almost mourning for your own relationship with your mother at the same time as not wanting to take on like a parent role for your younger sister.
Yeah.
So that it must be so difficult to untangle as somebody that's coming up to kind of the teen years, where I talk a lot about the big developmental leaps and on hormones, and your body starts
Yes.
changing, and
Yes, I just
and
had I mean, literally. Okay, so I was buying sanitary napkins and tampons for years before I ever hit that age because I wanted to be a grown up. Like, I was one of those girls who was ready, ostensibly ready, lipstick, hair. Like, I bought all the things. I wanted to be older for so long, so long. But, no one, like, we didn't talk about this stuff in my family. I mean, my mom knew I was precocious and wanted all that stuff, but I didn't, I was years away from it. But growing up with your father without people around to sort of be a woman role model was hard. I mean, I remember when he did date women that we were allowed to meet, just you absorb everything. What kind of perfume do they wear? What kind of makeup do they wear? Let me try on their shoes. Like, it was just like grabbing for some type of straw. What is it like to be a woman, a real woman, because I just didn't have that around. It was sort of like this thirst that I just couldn't quench.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that again comes across in your writing as well, with the matchbooks and
Yes.
and all of that stuff as well. So anybody that wants to know what I mean by matchbooks will have to go and have a little read of Ronit's work.
Yeah.
But I I wonder how I mean, I don't know if you've spoken to your father about this since, but when you started kind of pulling away from him, I wonder if he kind of knew why, or if he realized that something was going on with you but didn't feel comfortable enough to have that conversation because the roles in the house had changed so much at that point.
It's another really good question. And I think that I think there was a time when he would ask my sister, why is she so mad at me? Because when we were going someplace down we were going downtown in Queens and in Flushing, maybe I would walk many feet behind them, just try not to be with them.
Mm.
Any semblance, I loved my sister so much, but any semblance of me being a unit with my father no longer really felt safe to me. And part of the problem too is that I was a teenager, which part of this is normal. You're supposed to be annoyed at your parents
Mm.
as a teenager, I hear, but I never went through that rebellious phase with my mom because she was always just out of reach, and so I never got that angry phase and rebellious pushback toward my mom until I was in my late 30s and 40s, and she was in my life here while raising my own kids, and I could see she was present for them, and I got so angry that she wasn't present for me back then. So
Yeah.
we went through our hiccups. My father, I was pushing against, but it was twisted and disjointed because he also was the only parent that I had to take care of me. So there was danger involved there too. There was the danger of too close, and nothing physical happened between us at all. It was just this like emotional thing. But there was either too close or danger of being an unlikable kid. And where would I end up then?
Yeah, yeah. And I don't even know where I'd begin to try and work that out if that was something that I'd experienced. It's the only parallel that I could draw when I was reading those parts of your memoir. Before I went on maternity leave with our first child, I worked for a charity that supports young carers. So young carers, it's a little bit like parentification, but kind of like it's unavoidable. So the young carers are people aged 6 to 18 who look after a family member in the home who is not well. So there would be 6-year-olds who would bathe their parents that were wheelchair bound, or there would be 10-year-olds who would have a younger brother or sister with a diagnosis of autism, and they would help them with breakfast and get them dressed and help them with their routine to get them to school. So they were all young people caring for somebody else in the home, and it was my job to organize activities for them and take them on these activities to give them some respite from these responsibilities. And it was very interesting when I was reading about that, kind of, you were getting frustrated with your father at that age, because when you speak to the young carers at kind of ages 6 to 10, they say, I love looking after my little brother. I love looking after my mum. I love looking after my grandma. I don't ever want to do anything else. It's the best job in the world for me. I love them so much. It's all I want to do. And then as you work with the same children, you see them kind of reach the age of 12, 13, 14, and they're starting to say, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm growing resentful of my care and role. I'm growing resentful of the family member that's not well because of the responsibility that I have at this age to look after them. I'm starting to understand that maybe my childhood isn't as typical as peers in my year group at school. And then it starts to boil over to kind of lots of behaviors that land them in trouble with law enforcement or with school, and then their education starts to suffer, and they're making kind of questionable life choices around alcohol and substance abuse. And this is obviously, I'm talking like 10%. This is not generalization of young carers at all, but when I was reading your work, that was definitely a parallel that I could draw between kids that have that level of responsibility and the way that their mind changes in that situation as they grow older and realize.
So powerful to hear that from you. First of all, what an amazing charity, and so interesting that they're able to identify these kids, because it seems like it would be so easy for them to be missed. I'm so impressed by the nonprofit's ability to find these kids and identify them, and then also to provide the service. And it's also very validating to hear you mention this, because it shows me how developmentally accurate, like on target I was. And it makes me sad too, because it's very predictable that these kids in this one age group are going to fall into line and do this work to feel important, and then start to resent it and pull away. And so it makes me feel less alone about that, and happier to know that my reaction was regular, and also sorry that other kids have to go through this all the time, and in far worse situations than that's, again, that part of me that understands that I still had a lot, and a lot of people have it far worse. But if I would never go back to that time in my life. I mean, I'm grateful for the way it created this perspective in me and my ability to have relationships now. And I'm sorry I had to go through so much work to understand how to do it, but I don't think I'd be the person I am now or write the stuff that I write now if I hadn't gone through it.
I don't think that that's anything that you should ever use the word sorry for. I don't think that's something that requires an apology of any kind. We often talk about on this show, when people discuss their childhoods and the experiences that they had, that they only realize when they become an adult and start to work through things that they have to grieve the childhood that they didn't have. And that's definitely quite applicable, I think, here with your story, because you've gone from having this environment where you feel so safe and loved and part of a community, to move into America and losing your mum. There's definitely some grief there and some grieving to be done. And what's come out of that process is an incredible book, loads of projects in the pipeline, which I'm excited to talk about towards the end, and even your own podcast. So I think it's fantastic. And it must have been a hard time with transitions and changes aside for your mum and dad. The 70s were a really tumultuous time in America for a lot of people anyway, from the research I've done. I'm just now looking into the Satanic Panic as my Patreon series, and that starts with a few deep dive episodes into Charles Manson and the Manson family. And what I've learned from all of this research and reading is that you've got, like, on the one hand, you've got this huge growing fundamentalist movement where the religion is just growing and growing and growing in America at rapid rates, and it's all about modesty and purity. And then you've got the other side of that, which is like a counterculture for so many things: Ronald Reagan, Watergate, anti-war, post-Vietnam, post-Great Depression. You've got like Summer of Love and music and hallucinogenic drugs and like the shift in society that happened in America during that time, the 60s into the 70s, along with this other side of things, like this growing fundamentalist movement. Like it's all, from what I can gather, it's all contributed to movements like this one that your mum became a part of. It gave them space to grow, to be so attractive to people who have grown up in these fundamentalist environments, who want to go and have this freedom. And then to be told that you can go and live under the sex guru, where sex is encouraged, and you've grown up in this really conservative household, and now you're being told that, we're gonna experiment with drugs, we're gonna have sex with multiple partners, and that is encouraged here, and that is the beauty of living on this community, and everybody's gonna. And then you've got the attractive side of, you will contribute to this community, you will grow the crops, you will work with the children, you will help build,
you'll create this world.
Absolutely,
it's empowerment. It's empowerment. And it's also, it's this time, it's sold as this way to really honor who you are and achieve the place you're supposed to be, and realize, self-actualize. And it sounds great. I mean, it sounds fantastic, but as I write in the book, I feel that the real test of your courage and your strength and your emotional accessibility is how you deal with people and people who need you, and the people that rely on you, not leaving them, because I'm probably really great when I'm alone. I mean, I don't bug anyone. I don't irritate anyone. I don't fall short. No one is disappointed in me. But it's in relationship that we learn how to be ourselves, and how to fight for what's important, and how to back down when maybe we're wrong, and how to be honest and courageous, and how to be vulnerable, which is a really, really important part of growth. And these places, I feel like they don't foster vulnerability. Would not be a safe thing in these places. And I know some of them really cultivate vulnerability so that the leader can capitalize on it and exploit their people. I can understand the damage that's done to cult survivors after giving over so much of themselves and feeling like they can't trust themselves or their judgment again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just have to kind of, when we talk about, when I never tried to use the word cult myself to apply to these groups that people come and discuss. If guests want to use that word and apply that to the group that they were a part of, that is absolutely, it's their story, and that's the way they want to tell it, and I can appreciate that and respect that. But when I've done deep dives on Jim Jones and the People's Temple, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, when I've looked at Rock Terrio and the Anthill Kids, when we talk about Charles Manson and the Manson family, when you look at Bhagwan, Sri Rajneesh, it all happens in that same period of time, and there has to be a reason for that. And I'm starting to realize that maybe some of that is the counterculture and this community of people who are searchers. They are looking for something bigger than themselves.
It was so common. It was so common. And in serving the self and happiness and your own sense of fate and where you belong was the most important thing. It was the most important thing. And it absolutely was in this era. I mean, there are still tons of groups like this. As you know, they pop up all the time, and they've been going on for a long time. But this was this moment in our history where they all seem to be cropping up. And my father especially didn't talk a lot about it for with me and my sister when it was happening. He was following the news and clipping articles, and part of, he was getting very concerned about my mom when she went to Rajneesh Puram in Oregon, because there was only one road in, and Jonestown had happened, and he knew the arsenal of weapons that Ma Anand Sheila and Bhagwan had, accumulated there for their people. It was becoming very militant and very paranoid too, which is another aspect of some of these groups. And so he didn't know what could happen and what was going to happen to my mom. And even several years after she left, when we wanted to go visit, he had to wait a little bit to make sure she was okay.
It must have been very scary. You've learned later on that your father wanted to protect you from that. And there is a moment in the book where somebody comes to speak at an event that you're attending about cults and potential red flags and critical thinking and things like that, which is quite a poignant moment in the book, if not the most poignant moment in the book, I think, in terms of discussing cults as a topic. And it's interesting that he kind of knew what was going on, but didn't want you to worry about your mom.
Yes.
Or especially as things kind of started to take questionable turns in Antelope, Oregon, to potentially not want you to think that your mom had anything to do with the criminal activity that unfolded in Antelope. And for anyone that's not familiar with the story, I don't know if you want to fill the listeners in on how they built the ranch. And
well, this is a part of the docuseries Wild Wild Country that really helped me. And also they do very well in the docuseries. It's a really nice, if you like a montage of things happening and progress, you'll love it, because you see the whole cultivation of the land and the buildings. I mean, when they were done with this arid plot of land, when they were done with this acreage, there was an airport, there was an airfield, there was a post office, there were restaurants, there was a mall, there was housing for everyone. They had all these little courtyards, they had pavilions. It was grand. I mean, it was beautiful. You could go into the little general store and buy more Bhagwan colored clothing. You could buy all the Bhagwan paraphernalia. They had festivals every year. And when they had their festival, thousands of people would come in on buses. They had a hotel in Portland. They just were everywhere. And I did a reading in Stevenson, Washington at my friend's bookstore, North Bank Books. And she some of the people who came to the reading had lived in the area at the time, and they remembered seeing the Rajneeshis, the sannyasins, walking around in Portland with their mala. And I didn't mention that it's something I take for granted, but one way you would always know a follower of Bhagwan is they would wear a black beaded mala, and at the end would be a photo of Bhagwan. And actually, my book, which the cover is behind me, those beads are on the cover to represent the mala. On my cover, it's breaking. And, you know, my mom wore that, and then they would wear Colors of the Sunset, and which was sort of this enlightened idea of a sannyasin. And so what was really interesting is that you see this on the footage, and you know the story if you're me, but it still seems sort of mythical. And I write this in the book as well, because for me, it was something that happened and then happened again. And I forgot about it. It was a blip. It's just a one-liner. My mom left to follow a guru. Ha ha ha, you know. And then all of a sudden, here comes this docuseries and everyone's talking about it. And then to go and do this book launch and meet people who will say, oh, I was there and I saw them, and we saw them walking around and we didn't know what they were doing. And they knew about this. It was in their neighborhood. And there was a lot of defensiveness about that and wariness. But what they did build was pretty impressive. And I was impressed, even as the child of someone who followed and left me. I watched, you know, these buildings going up and this planning that went into it. They had these engineers, and they had the legal side covered, because they had these sannyasins who were doctors and lawyers and rich people and actors. And they had everything they needed to build this community and this place. And you could see that they felt this was going to stay, that this was their land forever. And so I can understand their feelings of sadness and loss when it all broke apart later.
Absolutely. And sannyasin is kind of a word, the word for somebody who followed Bhagwan. And it always does remind me of sort of the Hare Krishnas with that same kind of colored clothing. And people would know straight away if somebody was a sannyasin because of the clothes they wore, the colors. And for anybody that's wondering what the land looked like before they started building on it, it was just barren. It was just barren land. There was nothing there. There were no buildings. There were no aqueducts. There was no sewerage. There was no telephone communication pylons. None of that existed before they moved.
They did everything, and they started in 1981. I mean, they began it in 1981, and they had, you know, at its height, you know, there were several thousand people who lived on there, but it ended like 5 years later. I mean, it was just like falling apart 4 or 5 years later. Yep. And you know what became of it, right? Do you know?
I don't. Oh,
so it got shut down. You know, the FBI came, and part of this is in my book. And ultimately, it just lay there. And then it eventually got bought, and is now a Young Life Christian camp.
Interesting.
Which is very funny, right?
Yeah, that is
very interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to look a little bit more into that, actually. That is interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that would be what it was. I thought it would be used by other businesses because of how well it was laid out.
You know, when you think about, there was a lot to be proud of. I mean, the irrigation and their beautiful crops, they were really self-sustaining. And I get it, you know, I mean, that's part of it, is I understand this idealized vision of how you want to be and how you want to live in the world, and how wonderful it must have felt to think, I'm part of this. I mean, I get it. I really do. But, you know, nothing, it just couldn't stay that way. And corruption sort of ate through from the bottom up, you know?
And it in a big way as well, because for anybody that's not aware of this movement or how the movement ended, Antelope was a small town that was kind of next to Rancho Rajneesh, and I think they wanted the ability to become an official registered town or city, and to do that they needed to be part of the government or
Yes, there was a lot of voting. There's a lot of friction and tension and hostility and actual dangerous things happening because if the people on Rancho Rajneesh got enough people voted in, they would have the majority and they would be able to create the future, all the different kind of zoning and all the rules and regulations for antelope. So that's another main theme in the docuseries that I don't cover as much in my book, which is the tension between antelope residents and Rancho Rajneesh residents. But so we did touch on the salmonella, but basically, Sheila and her minions, Ma'anan Sheila and her minions, cultivated salmonella in their lab, and they poisoned local salad bars right before the election so they could sicken enough people to throw the election, so that Rancho Rajneesh would have their people in the forefront. And 700 people got sick, and 45 people were hospitalized. No one died, but they also, they poisoned waterways. There was an assassination attempt.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, there was an assassination attempt on a U.S. state attorney. It was just like a lot of nefariousness, And the thing is, like, if they had just stayed on Rancho Rajneesh and made it beautiful and not gotten up to all this other stuff, it might have still been here today.
And the scary thing as well was the integration of members, sannyasins, into Antelope without Antelope residents realizing that they were members of this community.
Yes.
Who had almost secretly infiltrated.
Yes.
So they could find out insider information, because you talked about having lawyers, politicians, doctors, who would kind of integrate themselves into the Antelope community, and
Yes.
it wasn't a very big community. It's not a big place, and they would gather insider information and relay that back to the higher ups back on the ranch, and that was kind of the big plan to dominate the vote. And then when people caught on to what was happening there, they started to manufacture these viruses, and I think it's still classed as the biggest.
Yes, it's the biggest bioterror attack on U.S. soil to date.
Yes, yep.
Which is kind of, I can't believe no one else has done one that big yet, and thank goodness. But still, that's their notorious act that stays in the history books. And I just, again, I have to say, like, I understand the need to be safe and secure and with a community of like-minded thinkers, but I do think it's very hard for human nature not to muck it up. It's just really, really difficult, and they just bit off more than they could chew. And the interesting thing about Bhagwan, I don't know if you know this, toward the end of his tenure, he took a vow of silence. He just stopped speaking and stopped lecturing. There were times but right before that, when he would lecture to the masses, but he would be sucking on nitrous oxide in a dentist chair. So he had like a dentist chair repurposed, and he would sit in it. And this sounds too strange to be true.
Yeah.
But he would literally have a mask and suck from it nitrous oxide and then deliver his lectures.
The charismatic way that he speaks is very long and drawn out anyway. So I can't imagine how it must sound with that involved.
Yeah,
as well.
I just, it's so funny. Our perspective shapes so much, because the first time I ever heard his voice, I was 5, and I heard it coming out of a cassette tape from my mom's darkened bedroom. And I didn't like it then. And I didn't like it when she took us and listened to those tapes in centers, like Rajneeshi centers. And I'll never, ever be able to hear his voice or look at his face without that association. Whereas for other people, he was brilliant, and he was enlightening, and he was beautiful.
Yeah. I remember in the early days of the podcast, I put a post up of what I and not just me, but if you typed cult into Google, you get a few pictures come up, and Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh's face is definitely one of those. And I remember putting sort of like a montage or not a montage, but a collage on Instagram of all the different faces. And there was Warren Jeffs of the FLDS and to all the people we mentioned before, Jim Jones and Charles Manson. And somebody commented on it like, never speak of Osho in that way.
Oh, there it is. We're going to talk about that. Yes. So Osho, and I don't know if it's Osho or Osho, so I'll defer to you. So after Bhagwan fled and was sent back home, he changed his name to Osho, which is Japanese, and he preached. I'm not quite sure what he preached, but that was his name. And so that there is an Osho Center. There is like an institute, right? And before my book came out, they wrote me an email and asked how they could get a signed copy of my book. And because they heard about my book and I, was promoting it. And I actually have to circle back with them. I feel like I don't know that they'd want my book behind their, on their shelves. But the other thing is that not long ago I posted something, because I post a lot, and I keep saying post, but I'm very active on social media. I tell a lot of my background, and I share photos so people can find me there. But at one point I posted something, and I mentioned Osho. I hashtagged it, and someone came for me and told me how much Osho had changed their life, and how they never met Osho, but they knew their teachings because, they're too young to have been alive. But what they learned has changed their life, and I really should get educated before I And I kind of just replied that, well, you can't really tell me what my experience was like, and this was my experience. So why don't you read my book? And then we can talk.
Yeah.
and then we didn't really engage after that. But that's what you get for waking up the dragon, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just responded saying thank you for your perspective, which is actually something I do appreciate. I do appreciate
yes.
it when people come forward and say, your podcast is called The Cult Vault, and you've had somebody come on and talk about Mormonism, and I'm a Mormon, and I don't think Mormonism is a cult. And then I like to have a discussion about how I can appreciate that, and how the guest that was on the show, that may be their opinion and their perspective and their experience in one part of the world, or maybe even in their household that follows the same beliefs, but is completely different to the experience that you've had in a different part of the world, or in your household that follows the same beliefs, which I think is very
absolutely important. And some would argue, there is a conversation around what is a cult and how is organized religion, where does it fit there? And my mom will say that, in her view, Bhagwan, she was not following a cult.
Definitely. So that's even now she has.
No, it's not a cult. She doesn't feel she was brainwashed or that it was a cult. No.
Has she watched the documentary?
I think she really couldn't do much of that. I think she watched like one episode and it was too much for her. And my sister watched all of them, but grew incredibly bored by the last one. And I too felt that it petered out a little bit. But it's hard. My mom has a push pull with this story, and I basically decided to write part about her life, right? Which is why, because I was writing about her life and my father's life, I felt like all memoirists, that you need to be respectful, of if you have someone else's story in your hands, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when this person comes to you and says, you can't speak about Osho that way because he changed my life. Well, he also changed yours as well. Indirectly, but directly, like, changed your life.
He really did. And it is really unbelievable to me. I mean, I'd written the book prior to this docuseries coming out. I was already querying agents with it. But after the docuseries came out, I was able to go back and sort of add some new elements, because it had woken up in me this other feeling of, sharing this story with the world at large, and it being about so much more than what happened to my family.
Do you think as well that the documentary coming out and being as successful as it was gave you maybe some more traction in getting people to look at your work and giving it sort of more attention?
I think so. I think that memoirs are an interesting genre, because there's celebrity memoirs, and there's memoirs by people who have done really bad things. There's people who have recovered from terrible situations. But really, like, I'm not a celebrity, and I didn't kill anyone, and I didn't end up on the street because of my life. And so I was concerned that would there be an audience for the book? And you're always worried when you create something and put something out there. And, but there was interest because people knew this story and they knew who Bhagwan was and they'd heard of it. And for them, it was very intriguing. And as soon as you talk about coercive control or cults, people, they're immediately interested. It takes you beyond the regular kind of experience into something that seems a little more exotic or dangerous. And so I think I did have that going for me. But at the heart of my book is, I think it's like a lot more than that. I think it is a story about Bhagwan and his effect on my life, but it's a coming of age story. It's a growing up in the 80s story. It's a Jewish story. It's a New York story. It's a single father story. It's a divorce story. Like it's a sister story. And it's like I lost my mother's story, right? But it's also a story of reconciliation because, my mom and I have a relationship. And I think that what we've achieved is not something I could have predicted. And I was able to add that to the book after we had that really pivotal conversation and make it the epilogue. And that wasn't there in the draft I sent out, in 2018.
All of those things as well. And you left out the bit that resonated with me personally about the fumbling through childhood into young adulthood.
Oh, yes. And it's a coming of age, like awkward teen story. I meant if you've ever had a situation where your clothes didn't zip up around your waist or you felt, too big or too much, or you didn't fit in, which I think so many of us have. This story covers a lot of that because I really didn't understand exactly how much I didn't feel like I was okay or was enough. And that's part of what I explore in the book. And also what I love to talk about as a teacher and as a mom, and what I've learned now, being so much more secure in my attachments and relationships, is, that it's possible to get better and it's possible to grow and it's possible to change and it's possible to be vulnerable and believe in loving relationships that don't hurt you. But the biggest legacy was for me that I was left and that I must then be leavable. And so that's a lot of what the book covers.
And it's so sad, some parts of it as well. I just wanted to give little Ronit a little cuddle and say it's all okay. But at the same time, I was thinking like, no, she probably wouldn't let me because she just does not need that. Like, she could take
that's
care
so
of herself.
Funny. Well, I told myself I could take care of myself, right? Like that part in the book where some moms finds out that my dad is divorced, that we're divorced, that I don't have my parents in the same house. And she looked at me kind of with pity. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And to me, I thought, what are you sorry for? Like, everyone gets divorced. Like, look at my mom, look at my dad, look at my grandparents, look at my uncle, like everyone gets divorced in my family. So, I didn't understand that anything could be different. But that's part of the story that one of my editors wanted to tease out, which was that, look what you have now that you didn't have. Look what you've been able to find, even though you didn't have an example.
Which is so great for me when I hear people that have these experiences and think that is the typical thing, or they say that they're sort of a member of the LGBTQ community, but they don't live sort of that authentic life to themselves because they're part of a religious movement that restricts that or has doctrine sort of against that community group. So they're never going to experience life with somebody of the same sex, and then but at the point where they're speaking to me, they're married with their partner and they're so happy and they have all of the things that they were told they would never have. So you're married and you're not divorced.
Yes. And it's like a jump cut. It's like a satisfying jump cut in your interviews. Cause it's like this quick paced montage, like all this stuff happened and it was really hard. But look, it turned out okay. It turned out okay. And, I'm alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that's important to mention just before we move on to the next part is that although the Wild Wild Country documentary does glamorize, or I don't know if glamorize is the right word, but shows Bhagwan and the ranch in a certain light, and kind of brings it to the viewers in the way that the documentary team wanted to share the story, that has given others a platform to get their stories listened to and their stories heard in a way that might not have been possible if that glamorized version didn't exist.
Yes,
so
that's really interesting. Yes.
Yeah, so because I remember when I found out that Kim Kardashian, she does a lot of work with people on death row and trying to get convictions overturned, and then I found out that she was going to start a podcast, and my first thought was, oh, I'm working so hard to get my podcast out there, to get some followers on Instagram, and she's going to come along with her like 100 million followers, and they're all going to listen to her podcast, and it's really hard for little old me to get new listeners. But at the same time, I had to sit back and think, there's a whole new demographic of listener that's going to come in, people that have watched their reality TV show that might have never have listened to true crime or never have watched podcasts, and those unsolved cases are going to have fresh ears, fresh perspectives, people that might have seen something or heard something or see something, and then they can, get in touch with the appropriate people.
I totally agree with you. In a way, more is more. What you're talking about is sort of that abundance thing. And I try not to use those little catchy phrases and things. I'm not a life coach, but I think that also the idea that there's no limit, like there's room for us all, right? There's no limit to the compassion in the world or the attention in the world. I mean, yes, it's a very bustling market and there's so much content to choose from, but your point is really important. I appreciate that, because you're saying that she's going to create interest in the medium, and then there will be more people who engage and will find you, right? So it doesn't have to be like a competitive thing. And I found that too for myself, like the more I put out there, the more I give, then honestly, really, the more I get back anyway. So it's kind of like that too.
Absolutely. And that shows just by you sending me a little copy of your book to read, which I really enjoyed.
Oh,
so your mum's gone over to Oregon. How long is she there for before she comes back? And do you know the reason why she comes back when she does?
Yes. And I'm so torn, Casey, because aren't I supposed to leave something for suspense so people will get the book?
You definitely are. Yeah.
Shouldn't I? I mean,
so maybe she's still there.
No, she's actually upstairs right now because my sister just flew in and we're having a big celebration in the family this weekend. And so I haven't seen them yet. They're upstairs eating bagels because we're Jewish. They're having bagels and lox and cream cheese. I'll use my New York accent. And my son has come into the room where we're recording several times and I've had to wave him out. So I'm like trying to continue the conversation with you, but he's like, come on. And I'm like, I'm doing a thing right now. So anyway, it's very funny. I just texted them and said, please leave me alone. I'm on my favorite podcast right now. So So I guess my mom and I have a relationship now, but as I mentioned, it was not always this. We saw each other. I saw her in the summers as a teenager, but it was always this sort of rapid, enjoyable, concentrated time. We never really talked about anything. It was just, she made great food. I saw her in the summer. My sister and I had fun. It was so fun to live with my mom and be able to walk around however we wanted to because there were no men around, and just eat the delicious food my mom made and just be like with my mom. It was like heaven, And then after 5 or 6 weeks, we'd go back to New York to, the roaches in our apartment and the crowded city and all that stuff. Cause, we lived in this really crammed area of Flushing, and Seattle was like blue sky and gorgeous trees and really like vanilla people. And we were just like, it was like a whole different life. Do you know what I mean? So no roaches where I lived with my mom, and she cooked for us, and I didn't have to do the cooking when I saw her, and it was such a relief, but we never talked about what happened. We just sort of forged ahead and took what we could get and went ahead as if like that didn't happen. And so it wasn't until after my kids were born that I started to push back, and I started to get really irritated that she was here with them when she couldn't be there with me. And had she had these maternal instincts with me, was there something wrong with me? Why why wasn't she able to stay for me? And how can she do it now? And also thinking, wow, my kids are going to experience my mom as a super duper grandma, but she wasn't a super duper mom. And it was really difficult for me. I was resentful. I was jealous in a strange way.
Yeah,
And yeah, very unsettled. And it wasn't good. It was like our fake relationship, the one that I loved in the summers, was gone. And, she was here all the time. And for the first time in my whole life, she wasn't moving around every year. My whole life, she had a different address like every year. And then for the last however many years, she's been in the same place. And I was like, why now when I don't need you the way I needed you back
go
then, right?
traveling, go to another country.
Like, what the heck, man? But now in the last 5 years, 4 years, it's really deepened and grown. And she says to me, she feels we're closer now than we've ever been.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably true if she stayed where, if she stayed put for the amount of time that she has. And it's interesting when you talk about summers with your mom and, she would let you have some more of the junk food that maybe your father wouldn't let you have. But I wonder if those weekends that you had with your mum and those summers that you had with your mum were the equivalent of those 2 hours that you had on the kibbutz, because your dad had you all the time, so he couldn't let you eat junk food all of the time, and he couldn't, maybe he couldn't afford to if you're going to live in an apartment full time, you need more space than maybe an apartment that you're going to only spend the weekend or the summer in, and so your mum's like giving you all these treats, maybe to
you're so Casey, you're such a close reader. I mean, you're such a nuanced thinker, and I feel like you cover so much in our time together, and you picked up so much from the book. My mom really was like the gift parent. She would take us to the movies, she would take us to the things, she taught us how to ride bikes, she took us to the restaurants. Like it was like a fun weekend, right? It was like always fun. It wasn't real life. And I think that was hard for him sometimes,
but
it's hard.
He had you all of the time, and maybe if your mum had you all of the time, she wouldn't.
Sure. Absolutely.
Wouldn't give you those experiences. So she's almost given you sort of the equivalent of the 2 hours.
Yes. And also I would say that, so she is a phenomenal cook, and she loves to cook. And so I love like it when she cooks for us, but I just
I want her to cook for me as well.
I'll tell her that. I'll tell her that because, she's such a good cook. Comfort food, oh gosh, I'm not going to lose my train of thought. Oh yeah, food. So I love food. I love it. I love not cooking for myself. And you're right about the food in the kibbutz time and the food with the visits with my mom, because the kibbutz time, we'd have snacks and tea and gather together. So food and warmth and community. Seeing my mom on the weekends, food and love and closeness. And so my love of food and my feeling that food is good for your heart and for your soul and for your body, and it's a way to celebrate and be close to people, extended to my life now. So I, there's so much like situational food for me. Like, are we going on a road trip? I'm going to go buy some road trip snacks.
Yeah, I understand that.
Is my friend coming over for a little while? I'm getting some cheese and crackers and some delicious like dips. There's always like, what are we going to eat? What are we doing for food? And it truly is like, my sister comes to visit. Okay, let me go get the snacks. Like, absolutely is so much part of my life. So
now upstairs with the family gathering, there's probably like not just bagels, but lots of other nice things.
I'll tell you if anyone else loves food and wants to know, she made homemade eggs, because this is like a deli type of thing, because it's the morning time. So like egg salad, homemade tuna fish salad, which is really good. It sounds boring, it's really good. And she brought a challah, because tonight is Shabbat. It's a Friday when we're recording this, so we're going to have Shabbat dinner tonight. And there's bagels, and there's 4 kinds of cream cheeses, and there's all this lox, and she's cut up onions and tomatoes and cucumbers to put on the bagels, and there's going to be tons of coffee. And this is what I have after the interview. So it's like a perfect day.
It sounds absolutely incredible.
You have to come over, Casey.
Yeah, it's like 9 o'clock. It's like 9 o'clock at night over here, and I'm down for breakfast.
Oh, and you're a mom too, so you're like, you have a new baby again, so you need someone to take care of you.
Yeah, and you make the good milk when you fill yourself full
Yes.
of all the good calories. So
Yes.
there's that excuse as well to have a little binge. But just before we wrap up for the day, so that you can go and be with your family, have your parents read your book?
Yes.
What
Yes.
what was have you what was their reaction?
Okay. So here's the story. I didn't let them read it until I knew I had a book deal. I didn't see any reason for them to read my manuscript unless it was going to see the light of day. It
Right.
wasn't something I had to get off my chest just for the sake of it. So once I knew it was really happening, I gave them each the manuscript, my mom, my dad, and my sister. And I should mention the names, and I do mention this in the acknowledgments, that the names of everyone in the book besides me have been changed to protect privacy. So my sister got back to me first and she said, and I'd published some freestanding essays and on my website, which we'll talk about, you can find all my individual articles and stuff on this subject, but she'd read some of my point of view in those, and so had my parents. So I think everyone was a little bit on edge, especially because I used to write fiction, and I have a fiction story coming out as a collection. But I think when I switched to memoir, my mom was a little panicked because there really is only one story I was going to tell in my memoir, and that would have to do with her.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little bit edgy for all of us. My sister did mention it was hard to see herself as a character in someone else's book. Like it's hard to read about yourself as a character,
Yeah.
which I totally get that. And but luckily she was able to also remind me of two things that I'd forgotten, and I added them back into the book. I knew that they'd happened, but not some of the intricate parts of them. When we find out that my mom is not coming back the second time from summer camp, my sister reminded me that she sent us cards, that my mom sent each of us a card to tell us the news. And I had completely blocked that part out. I didn't remember on my own the scene of us reading those cards and crying.
Yeah.
And so I was able to remember them. So, I'm so grateful for my sister for so many reasons, but in part to help me remember things that I might have forgotten. My mother, I brought pastries over to my mom's house. My car was in the shop, so I biked over to my mom's house with a bag of pastries to talk about the book. And I brought a notebook, and we sat outside because it was COVID. And she said, I'll make it brief, but basically she was relieved that this was the version of the story that was going to be in the world, that she'd seen other versions of the story or angles that I'd talked about our relationship that seemed angrier and seemed more maybe combative or unsettled. And she really appreciated the way I approred the story and what
absolutely.
I wrote about her.
Definitely, yeah.
So I was so relieved. Now, the conversation that I had to brace myself for was my father, because he sent me 9 pages of single-spaced notes about my book. And I mean 9 pages.
Wow.
And I printed them out and I read them while I kind of just clenched my jaw. And some of them were corrections for my Hebrew. Some of them were timeline corrections, but some of them were like a conversation with my book about, I didn't know you felt this way, and why didn't you tell me your clothes didn't fit?
Oh, bless him. Oh.
Yes. And some of it was, he went to bat for a couple of things that he was certain did not happen the way they happened. And luckily I have the fortitude and my sister's backstory along with mine to remember that I hadn't made this up. And I think this is important too. And I want to share this, that I got upset. We were, gesticulating outside of a cafe, and, my father and I were so similar, and he knows me so well because he raised me, and I know him so well because he raised me, that we really know how to get under each other's skin.
Right.
And, we really just have this thing, and we also love each other. And I ended up getting pretty heated, and I said, Dad, you're making me go to bat for my version of a story. And in a way, I feel like you're taking away my agency when I didn't have agency at the time that all this happened. And now you want me to not tell my story the way I want to tell it, when I already wasn't able to tell my story the way I wanted to tell it, because nothing turned out the way I wanted it to when I was young. And I felt really powerful, really strongly about that. And I did change one thing. I tempered my clothes didn't fit a lot of the time. And he was worried that it would sound like he didn't buy me things and he didn't take care of me. And so I had to clarify that I never told him that the things didn't fit
No.
because I was too embarrassed that the clothes didn't fit. And, my cousins called me Miss Piggy. My uncle called me Miss Piggy. And it was too embarrassing. I wanted to wear the pretty skirts that were hand-me-downs from his girlfriend's daughters. I wanted to fit into them and I couldn't. So I made sure to add into that part of the book that my father didn't know, because I didn't want people to feel that, he was a vindictive or careless parent. He tried so hard. And so, yeah. So, I am very lucky to have the reception I had from my family. And we see each other, not my sister, because she lives in a different state, but I see my mom and dad about once a week.
And you all have food
we
together.
Still do. We still do. I write about the Shabbat dinner. And every time we just kind of do a countdown for every time my dad is going to mention the kibbutz, because every Friday night he brings it up as if he only ever lived on the kibbutz instead of just 8 years. And then my mom rolls her eyes and she says, he didn't even like the kibbutz. So it's just what you read in my book is happening right now. I promise.
It's so funny. Maybe he didn't like the kibbutz, but he liked everything that happened after that less than.
Yes,
so he kind of goes back to that. He goes back to that sort of.
You did it again, Casey. So apt.
And when he talks about, when you mentioned at the start of the episode that he has reflected and since told you that maybe he shouldn't have left for New Jersey. Perhaps that's the reason why he didn't fight your mum when she didn't come back, maybe or maybe he did and we just don't know about that. But because he left and went to New Jersey and didn't fight for the family to stay together, or didn't stay in the area to support your mum with both of you physically, maybe he felt like it was his responsibility to have both of you there and to not rush her back from her experience and to try and work through whatever it was that she was working through. And I just can't imagine how difficult it must have been for either of your parents. And the only reason I have a little bit of an idea of how difficult it was for you was because I've read your book. But I know that for me, having two kids under 2, when they're both crying at the same time and they both need me urgently for something, my baby's crying because she needs feeding, and at that age it's life or death because that's all they know, because she's only a few weeks old. And my son's fallen over and he's hurt himself and he wants his mum because he's in pain, and I can't split myself in half and I don't know what to do. And there are moments where it's fight or flight or freeze, where you just think, I just need to walk out of the room for a minute and just breathe, because I don't know how to manage this situation. And
yes.
I think that's very taboo within parenthood, and people don't talk about it enough, but it's a very real visceral reaction to the overstimulation and the extreme anxiety and stress that comes with those situations, and that responsibility that basically, like, my son's not injured himself horribly, so he'll probably be okay. But regardless of that, both of these tiny human beings are solely reliant on me and their father to live and exist and be healthy. And that is a lot of responsibility, whether you've actively made the decision to go into parenthood or not.
No, it's so heavy. And my mom did say, and I think I alluded to this in the book, and I do talk about it, she really did to some extent feel my father would be a better parent when she left the first time. I think she either convinced herself of that or she did feel that, but she was angry. We felt it. I felt her anger. I felt it simmering there. And I think she was afraid she might hurt us. And so in her mind, part of her negotiation, I think, was they'll do better with their father.
And that is also something else that I think comes across wonderfully in your writing as well. So let's give all of this information to the listeners. The book is by Ronit, who you've had the pleasure of listening to this evening, or whichever time of the day you're listening to this episode. And the title of the memoir is When She Comes Back. And where can people find copies of this book?
So the book is everywhere. Wherever you get your books, you can get it. It's on your big places, the company that shall not be named. And it's also and it's also in your tiny bookstores everywhere. And if your bookstore doesn't have it, you can order it. It's in paperback and hardcover. The hardcover is really pretty, actually. They did a great job. And actually, cover artist John Gray is the one who designed this cover, and he's got some like Zadie Smith, and he's got Jonathan Safran Foer as some of his other authors. And the other thing I want to shout out is that you, of course, can get it on Kindle, but I recorded the audiobook, and the audiobook runs about 6 hours. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's only 6 hours. So if you're like a good podcast listener and you don't have time to read, please go ahead and get the audiobook. You can get that wherever you normally get your audiobooks. And there's a sample of the first couple of chapters as a gift for you on my website. So if you want to listen to the first couple of chapters and see, is this worth my money? And can I handle Ronit's voice for 6 hours? Then go ahead and listen to it. And the best places to find the book are what I just said. And then I am on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and it's all under my name, Ronit Plank. And I am very responsive. I listen, I watch my messages, and I write back because I also have a podcast. But please connect with me. And if you want to see photos of me, on, the kibbutz or growing up, or see these pictures of me and my sister after you've read the book, just come find them on Instagram and let me know you're there. I post a lot about resilience and on what it's like to find vulnerability again, and what I've learned as a mom and the experiences I've gone through. And I love connecting with people. And I have another book coming out in the spring and other projects in the works. So it would be great to just have you as a reader.
Absolutely. And people can then follow you on social media and keep up to date with all of your fantastic projects that you have in the pipeline. And we haven't really had a chance, because we've talked so much about so many different things, but we haven't really had a chance to discuss your writing process and how you kind of, if you're one of these people that had to go to the local library or shut yourself in a room, and how all of that worked and how you managed to get your book deal. So I don't know if there's a podcast that you featured on, or maybe even on your own podcast where you've spoken about that experience. So if anybody would like to know more.
Yes. So if you go to ronitplank.com, there are tabs for, the book, and there's tab for my writing, but there's also appearances and podcast appearances. And so you can find different places where I've appeared. I've been on NPR a couple of times. And so you can, listen to me talk about that. And also I've done a lot of interviews. There's an interview with me on Psychology Today and on Thrive Global. It's all there. And I also have a newsletter. So if you want a once a month newsletter to know what's going on with my writing or with my podcast, or just what my thoughts are and about relationships at the time, definitely sign up. I won't bombard you. And really, you can find everything you need on my website,
which is ronitplank.com. And I will post a link to the website in the episode description for anybody that would like to go and check that out. And also, I was looking earlier at the book When She Comes Back on Goodreads, which has a 4.7 rating, which is amazing.
Thank you.
So that speaks for itself. Just that
I've been so lucky. I've been so lucky. The writing community and the reading community have been so supportive. I've done book clubs and virtual appearances and Town Hall Seattle. And, people were on my advanced reader team to help get the word out, and they've just been lovely. And so now I have all these reviews. And if you do read the book and you love it, and this is advice for anyone whose book you read, the nicest and best thing you can do is tell friends about the book, and then leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes and Noble, wherever you got your book, because then other readers can find it. And it also, in the big cases like Amazon, really helps the algorithm. And so then it'll show up in other people's feeds.
Yes.
So that's the best thing you can do, especially for an independent author like me. And my publisher is a one-woman show who publishes books by mothers for mothers. So, you're really helping me and her get our work into the world when you leave a review. So thanks so much for pointing that out, Casey.
And the podcast that you run as well, and then Everything Changed, is also very interesting, interview based, and has some really interesting guest speakers. So I will also put a link to that in the episode description as well. So if anybody would like to go and check out your podcast
Thank you.
And listen to you on the interviewing end of an episode.
I do. I know I don't normally talk this much, believe me. I love to. You're an amazing interviewer and an amazing reader. And do you know the word mensch? Do you know that you're a mensch? It means
no.
it's a good person. It's Yiddish. It means a super great person. Like, and it's like you'll be like, oh, you're such a mensch. You know, like you're such a good person. So it's mensch, mensch. But you know, this time with you has been a gift, and I just love the work you're doing and how you get into your subjects and your guests' experience. And I'm so grateful that you wanted to read my book and feature my book, and that we connected. I just like the magic of this new world we live in of connection is just so lovely, and I'm really grateful.
It's great to be able to sit here in my time zone and have this face-to-face meeting with you whilst you're about to go and have breakfast over your time zone.
You know, I'm honestly going to toast you with my first sip of coffee and bite, because I can feel how much it would be great to have you here with us. But who knows, maybe I'll make it over by you one day.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That would be, yeah. I do like to take my trips over to America as well, but I know you guys are having a really tough time with COVID right now, so I might just wait a little bit longer.
Oh gosh.
But, it's been such an honor and privilege to read your work and to have you on the show, to hear your story and your experiences. As I mentioned at the start of the show, this interview today for me particularly was something important, because it's not often that we are able to gain the perspective of somebody who's been impacted by a member leaving to go and join a movement. There are so many people I speak to whose stories are equally as important, who have been the ones that have gone off to join movements or were born into movements and different groups, and come to share their experiences and how they have managed once they have left. But not often do we get the experience of somebody who has been affected by those decisions that somebody else has made, and so there's a whole new demographic of people that we're hopefully going to reach with this episode, and I think that's so important. Anybody that likes to read or anybody that likes to listen to audiobooks, I really do recommend Ronit's book When She Comes Back. I enjoyed every single minute of reading that book, even the parts that made me feel uncomfortable. And I said this in my episode yesterday when I was speaking to T from the Sufi branch. When I get uncomfortable, I do this thing, and I don't know if everyone does this, but my butt cheeks clench and I don't realize that I'm doing it. And there were a few parts in your book where I was butt clenching, and I was like, oh yeah, I feel uncomfortable and butt clenching. So there's definitely a couple of moments like that.
There's a couple of butt clenching moments, folks.
There's butt clenching, there's wholesomeness, there's everything you expect from needing to read on to know when she comes back, and needing to read on to just see how your story ends at the end of this kind of roller coaster journey. So I really do recommend it. And of course, your book is the first to feature in the Memoir Monday project, which we will be launching for September, where 3 lucky winners who come and join us on social media will be sent your book with a signed special message from you, which is incredible. I'm really
I can't wait to do it. I'm so excited too. I love sending readers books that I get to sign for them. Yes.
So that's all going to be launched. By the time this interview is released, I would have already released an episode that has a little update with all of that information in. So that's really exciting. So all that there is left to say, Ronit, is just thank you so much for your time today, and for being a fan of the show, for coming and telling your story. And I really hope that you go upstairs and enjoy all of this time with your family.
Oh, thank you, Casey. You're incredible. And I want you to take really good care of your family, and even more importantly, take really good care of yourself.
Fantastic. Have a good day, Ronit. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. Don't forget to follow, like, and comment on social media to be entered into the hashtag Memoir Monday giveaway. To get in touch, you can email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.